Sold the house on a Tuesday. Nobody knew until Friday. That's the version people hear now when I tell it at all. The short version. The one that makes people tilt their heads and say, well, good for you. But the real version, the one I've been turning over in my hands like a stone for the past 2 years, that one starts at my daughter's dinner table. On a Sunday night in late October, when I was 64 years old and apparently invisible. I want to be fair. I always try to be fair. So let me tell you who I was before that night. I am not someone who fell apart easily. I raised 2 children, mostly on my own after my husband passed. Stephanie was 11, my son was 8. I worked as an office manager for a civil engineering firm for 31 years. I kept a budget the way some women keep a garden, carefully, seasonally, always thinking ahead. By the time I retired, I owned my home in Dayton free and clear, had a decent amount saved, and, this matters, I owned a second property. A lake house in Michigan that my husband and I had bought together in 1991 for what felt like a fortune then and would be considered a steal now. 3 bedrooms, a screened porch, a dock that needed replacing every few years. It was the kind of place that holds a family together, or so I believed. My daughter Stephanie married a man named Grant when she was 32. Grant sold software solutions to mid-sized companies, which meant he spent a lot of time explaining things to people who hadn't asked. He was not unkind exactly. He was the kind of man who read the menu out loud to the table, even when everyone was perfectly capable of reading. They had 2 boys, 7 and 9 at the time. I adored those boys. After my retirement, Stephanie suggested I move closer. They were in Columbus, about an hour and 40 minutes from where I'd always lived. She framed it as wanting help with the boys, wanting me nearby, and I believed her because I wanted to. I sold the Dayton house, netted enough to be comfortable, and rented a small apartment 12 minutes from their home. I told myself this was a new chapter. I told myself I was being flexible, the way older women are told to be flexible. What followed was 2 years of being available. I want to be precise about that word, available. I picked the boys up from school on Tuesdays and Thursdays because Stephanie had a standing meeting and Grant had something. It changed. I was there on the occasional Friday overnight when they had a function. I cooked Sunday dinners most weeks at their house in their kitchen with groceries I usually bought. I am not listing these things to make myself sound like a martyr. I did them because I loved my grandsons and I loved my daughter, and I believed that was what family looked like. I noticed things, but I told myself I was being sensitive. The way Grant sometimes talked over me at dinner. The way Stephanie would trail off and change the subject when I mentioned something I was planning for myself. A trip. A class at the community center. Anything that suggested I had an interior life that didn't revolve around their household. Once, I overheard Grant tell Stephanie that I was always around. And the way he said it, the weight he put on that word, made me stand very still in the hallway for a moment before I walked back into the kitchen and pretended I hadn't. But I adjusted. I pulled back slightly. I stopped dropping by without calling first. I started saying no occasionally to the Friday overnights. I was trying to find the right shape for this version of my life, and I thought I was managing it. I was not managing it. The Sunday in October. I've replayed it so many times I can almost smell the candles Stephanie always burned in the living room. Some kind of spiced pear thing that I never liked but never said so. We were having dinner. The boys were talking about Halloween costumes. Grant was on his second glass of wine, and Stephanie said, in the particular tone she used when she was setting something up, "We've been thinking about the lake house." I waited. "We think it's time to have a real conversation about what happens to it, long term." I said as evenly as I could that I wasn't planning on going anywhere. Grant laughed. Not a mean laugh, or maybe it was. I've gone back and forth on that. It was a short sound, dismissive. He said, "Nobody's saying that, but let's be honest, you're not using it. You were up there, twice this summer? The carrying costs alone?" I told him I was aware of what I paid to maintain my own property. Stephanie gave Grant a look. He poured more wine. Then she said it. She said it the way you say something you've practiced in the car, something you've decided sounds reasonable. She said, "Mom, you have to think about this practically. The boys are growing up. We could actually use that space. And what are you really holding on to it for? At some point, you have to accept that things change, that your life is smaller now. That's not a criticism. It's just true. Smaller." I heard the word land. I watched her pick up her fork and continue eating. Grant nodded like she'd said something obviously sensible. I finished my dinner. I helped clear the table. I kissed my grandsons goodnight. The 7-year-old wrapped his arms around my neck the way he still did then, and I drove home to my apartment. I did not cry until I was inside with the door locked. I want to be fair to myself too, not just to them. I sat with it. I turned it over. I thought, maybe she didn't mean it harshly. Maybe smaller was just clumsy phrasing. Maybe I was tired and reading into things. But I kept coming back to the way she hadn't paused, hadn't softened it, hadn't looked at my face after she said it to see if I was all right. She just continued eating, like she'd said something about the weather. And I realized, sitting in my apartment at 10:30 on a Sunday night, that I had made myself so reliably present, so continuously useful, so predictably available, that I had become something they factored in rather than someone they considered. I was infrastructure, not a person at the table. Infrastructure. I slept badly. I woke up at 4 in the morning and lay there in the dark and thought about my husband who had died 22 years ago and what he would say. He was a quiet man who occasionally said very precise things. I think he would have said, "You already know what you need to do. You're just afraid to do it." I was afraid. I won't pretend I wasn't. But fear and I had met before. I called my friend Beverly the next morning. Beverly and I had known each other since our 30s. She was the kind of friend who said difficult things without cruelty. I told her what Stephanie had said. I told her what I had been thinking. Beverly was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you want, Joanna?" Nobody had asked me that in a while, including me. I thought about it seriously. I thought about the lake house, which I loved, the porch where I drank my coffee on summer mornings, the way the water looked at 7 in the morning when there was still mist. I thought about how I had been orbiting my daughter's life like something that needed to be accounted for, and how that was nobody's fault but my own for allowing it. And I thought, I want to stop being managed. I need to stop here and say something about the lake house, because it matters to the rest of this. The property was in my name alone. My husband and I had bought it before we had a will that specified otherwise, and when he died, it passed to me directly. I had paid the property taxes, the maintenance, the insurance for 22 years. Stephanie and her family used it roughly 5 or 6 times a year. They kept a few boxes of belongings in the second bedroom. They had never once offered to contribute to the carrying costs, which were not nothing. Michigan property taxes, the dock, the roof I'd replaced in 2019, the HVAC system the summer before last. None of that had ever come up. The assumption was simply that it was there, available, waiting, like me. I did not make any decisions that Monday. I am deliberate. I needed to think. What I did was call my attorney, a woman I had used for estate planning years before. I told her I was thinking about making some changes and asked whether I could come in. She had an opening Thursday. Between Monday and Thursday, I thought about what I was actually grieving. Because it was grief, in a way. I was losing a version of my life, a version of my relationship with my daughter, that I now understood had been partly imagined. I had believed I was chosen. I was close enough to see that I had been convenient. I went to see my attorney on Thursday. I told her I was considering selling the lake house. She asked me the practical questions. Was there a mortgage? No. Had I discussed it with family? I said it was my property and I was not required to discuss it with anyone, and she nodded in her measured way and said that was correct, and we talked about the process, the timeline, the tax implications, given what I paid versus the current market. The market, she said carefully, was quite good. I listed it the following Tuesday, with a realtor Beverly recommended, someone who knew that stretch of Michigan Lake property well. We priced it correctly, not greedily, correctly, and within 11 days we had 2 offers. I accepted one, closed in 34 days. I did not tell Stephanie. Let me explain that choice, because I know how it sounds. I want to be honest about my reasoning. Part of it was self-protective. I knew that if I mentioned it before closing, there would be a conversation, and the conversation would be framed as me behaving erratically, me being emotional, me needing to think this through. Grant would explain the market to me. Stephanie would use a soft voice that she used when she thought I was confused, and I was neither erratic nor confused, and I didn't want to spend energy defending a decision I had made carefully. But there was another part, a smaller, harder part. I wanted her to know what it felt like to find out something important after it was already done, to have the ground shift without warning. I am not entirely proud of that, but it's the truth. They found out on a Friday. I know this because Stephanie called me at 11 in the morning, and I could tell from the first syllable that she had just learned. The new owners had apparently contacted her. They had found a box of the boys' things in the second bedroom, some old board games and swim gear, and had reached out to arrange for pickup. They had been very kind about it. They had found Stephanie's number through some paperwork left in a kitchen drawer. Mom. Just my name, that flat tone that carries everything beneath it. I said hello. You sold the lake house. I said yes. Silence. Then, without telling us, I said it was my property. I said I had thought about it carefully and decided it was the right time. We had things there, Mom. The boys had things there. Do you understand what you just... Her voice broke in the middle and I felt it. I want to be clear that I felt it, because I am her mother, and that reflex doesn't leave you. But I also let it land, and I didn't immediately try to smooth it over, which is what I would have done before. Before October, before Smaller. I said I was sorry about the boys' things, that I should have arranged for those to be returned sooner, and that I would be happy to pay for shipping whatever the new owners needed to send. That is not the point. I said quietly that I knew it wasn't. I said the point was that for 2 years I had made my life smaller so that I could fit conveniently into the shape of hers, and that I had sat at her table on a Sunday night and been told that smaller was just the nature of my life now, and that I had decided it wasn't. I told her I had purchased a condominium in Asheville, North Carolina. I had been looking quietly for a few months before October, even before that Sunday dinner, because something in me had already known, I think, that I was living someone else's plan. A 2-bedroom, second floor, walking distance to downtown. I had put down an earnest money deposit the week after we talked. I would close in 6 weeks. She said nothing for a long moment. Then she said, "You're moving to North Carolina." I said yes. "What about the boys? What about..." She stopped. She was trying to find the word, I think, for what she was losing. And I think she was realizing in real time that she wasn't entirely sure what that was. I told her I loved my grandsons without condition, and that would never change. I told her I intended to fly back for their birthdays, their school events, things that mattered. I told her we could video call whenever they wanted, that I would leave a standing invitation for them to visit me in Asheville, that she and Grant were welcome too. I said all of this evenly because I had thought about it and I meant it. And then I said the thing that had been sitting in my chest for weeks, the thing I hadn't known how to say until I was actually saying it. I told her that I loved her, that I had always loved her, that I also understood I had made a mistake, not in the way she might expect me to say, not her mistake, but mine. My mistake was making myself so thoroughly available that I had trained everyone around me, including her, to treat my time and my presence as a resource rather than a gift. That I had done that, not her. And I was correcting it, not punishing her, correcting myself. She cried. I let her cry. When she was quieter, I said, "You told me my life was smaller now. I want you to know that I don't believe that. I think I was just living it small. There's a difference." She didn't have a response to that right away. That was all right. The weeks that followed were not easy. Grant sent me an email that was carefully written and nonetheless condescending, implying that I was reacting emotionally to a single comment and that major financial decisions made in a state of upset were something I might come to regret. I read it twice and did not respond for 3 days. When I did respond, I said I appreciated his concern, that the decision had been made over several months with legal and financial guidance, and that I considered the matter settled. I did not engage with the framing of upset. I was not upset. I was clear. Stephanie and I spoke again about 2 weeks after that first call. She was quieter. I think the intervening time had let her hear what I'd actually said rather than the version filtered through shock. She asked me if I had been unhappy. I told her unhappy was the wrong word, that I had been disappearing gradually, and that I had decided to reappear somewhere else instead. She asked if she could visit me in Asheville. I said, of course. I meant it. I moved in February. Beverly drove with me 2 days, splitting the driving, stopping overnight in Knoxville because she wanted to try a restaurant she'd read about. We pulled up to the building on a Saturday afternoon, and the Blue Ridge Mountains were doing what they do in February, which is sit there quietly and remind you that you are small in a way that has nothing to do with anyone's opinion of you. I stood on my second-floor balcony that first night with a glass of wine and no candles. I hadn't chosen myself, and I thought about all the Sunday dinners I had cooked in someone else's kitchen. I thought about smaller. My grandsons visited in July. Their father drove them down on a Thursday, and they stayed through Sunday. We hiked part of the trail near the Blue Ridge Parkway. The younger one held my hand on the steeper parts without being asked. We ate at a restaurant downtown on Saturday night, and the older one said, unprompted, that he thought I had a really cool apartment, and I told him thank you, that I thought so too. Stephanie came in September, without Grant, which I think was a choice she made deliberately, and I appreciated it. We sat on the balcony the first evening without saying much, which is sometimes what you need from your oldest friendship, even the ones that have been strained. She said, eventually, I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I said I knew that. I said I also thought she had meant some of it, in the way we sometimes say things we half believe without examining whether we should. I wasn't angry about it anymore. Anger had not been useful here. Clarity had been. She asked what I was doing with my time. I told her about the watercolor class on Tuesday mornings, the book club that met at the library on the first Thursday of each month, 7 women, good wine, genuinely good arguments about books, the volunteer work I'd started at a literacy nonprofit downtown, 2 afternoons a week, helping adults with reading and writing skills. I told her about Beverly's plan to come back in the spring and do a long weekend in the mountains. She listened, and I watched her face do something quiet, something I recognized because I was her mother and I knew her face. She was adjusting her picture of me, updating it. She had been carrying an image of me that was out of date, and she was replacing it now, in real time, with this version. This version on a balcony in Asheville with a full life in a watercolor class and no particular need to be managed. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no speech, no confrontation, no tidy resolution wrapped in a bow. Life is rarely that. But she reached over and put her hand over mine on the armrest, and she left it there for a while. Here's what I would tell anyone sitting where I sat 2 years ago trying to figure out if what they felt was real or just sensitivity, just age, just the ordinary friction of family. You already know. The thing you keep talking yourself out of believing, you believe it. The question is only what you do with it. I was not interested in punishing my daughter. I was not interested in making anyone suffer. I was interested in the rest of my life being mine to live, on terms I recognized, in a place I chose, at a size I determined for myself. I think about my husband sometimes, late in the evenings when the mountains are doing their thing outside the window. I think he would say I took a little longer than necessary, being a practical man who did not waste time on things that didn't need to be waited on, but he would say it kindly. I'm 66 now. The watercolors are getting better. The literacy kids? I'm not supposed to call them kids. Most of them are my age. They're the best part of my week, without question. Beverly is coming in April. My grandsons call me on video every Sunday. The younger one always wants to show me something, a Lego build, a drawing, a new fact he learned about deep-sea fish. Last week it was the anglerfish. He held his tablet 6 inches from his face with great seriousness and explained bioluminescence to me for 4 minutes. I told him I had learned something new. He said, "Grandma, you can always learn new things. You just have to keep going." He's 9 years old. I don't know where he got that, but I'm keeping it. I still think about the word smaller, not with anger anymore. That passed a long time ago. I think about it the way you think about a splinter you ignored too long, the small thing that told you something bigger was wrong. What happened between my daughter and me wasn't a single moment. It never is. It was 2 years of Tuesdays and Thursdays, of Sunday dinners in her kitchen, of making myself easy to reach and easy to use, and calling it love. I was not wrong to love her. I was wrong to confuse love with erasure. Those are not the same thing, and I think the price of confusing them for both of us was steep. Here is what I believe now, and I don't say it lightly. The way things turned out was not random. I had spent years teaching everyone around me, including my own daughter, exactly how to treat me, not with words, with behavior. With every time I showed up without being asked, with every need I quietly set aside so I wouldn't be inconvenient. You cannot do that for long and then be surprised when people stop asking if you're all right. I built that dynamic that was mine to own. But owning your part in something doesn't mean staying in it. That distinction matters enormously, and I wish someone had said it to me plainly 20 years ago. The decision I made, selling the lake house, moving to Asheville, building something that was genuinely mine, wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that because I know how it looks from the outside. It was correction. There's a kind of quiet courage required to stop living inside a story that was written for you by other people's assumptions, especially when those people love you and mean well and genuinely cannot see what they're doing. That courage is not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up at 4 in the morning when you're lying in the dark and finally deciding to believe what you already know. Stephanie is a good person. Grant is Grant. My grandsons are the clearest evidence I have that the future is still worth showing up for. None of that changed. What changed was me deciding that loving them did not require me to disappear on their behalf. I think about what my grandson said to me on that video call, completely unprompted, with total confidence. You just have to keep going. 9 years old. He learned that somewhere, probably from a nature documentary about fish. But I'm keeping it anyway, because the source of a true thing doesn't make it less true. The watercolors are getting better. The literacy work 2 afternoons a week fills something I didn't know was empty. Beverly is coming in April and she already has opinions about which trail we're doing first. My life is not smaller. It is, if anything, more precisely mine than it has ever been, which turns out to be the only size that matters. I learned that too late and also just in time.